interrupt me at any point. Okay? I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say. I'll start from that video there. I was a pre-Vatican II baby. Okay, I was brought up, was born 3 years before the state of Israel, modern state of Israel, came to be. I was born in 1945, a long time ago. And from grade school, high school, college, graduate school, I was always in Catholic schools. And I got a pretty good pre-Vatican II sort of education. The philosophy, the theology that I studied, I found extremely valuable. And it kind of consumed me. When I majored in philosophy at Assumption, I had that thought that I wanted to be a priest. And I knew that you had to study philosophy in order to get ordained. But for some reason, I did not want to go to the seminary. When I was in high school down in Florida, I was called over the PA one day to the office. And I thought, oh God, what have I done now? Went to the office and the principal said, somebody in there wants to see you. And I went into the office and there was the vocation director for the Diocese of Miami sitting there. He was kind of a huge old guy. He was all crippled, sitting behind the desk. It was a terrifying figure for me at that time. He said, well, son, I hear you want to be a priest. I said, yes, Father. You should come to the seminary in Miami. And I just blurted out, no, Father. And he said, why? And I said, I want to get an education on my own. That's something I never thought about, but that's what popped out of my head at the time. And so off I went to Assumption, and Assumption had a really good philosophy department. And I fell completely in love with philosophy. Basically, for the next 20 years of my life, that's what I was doing. I went to Notre Dame, went to BC, philosophy, political philosophy. And finally, got around to the priestly part of it, and returned to Assumption and studied theology at the Weston School of Theology in Boston at that time. I didn't like it at all. I didn't like the kind of post-Vatican II, very confused sort of theology that was being taught at that time. And I became, my gut instinct was to protect the kind of education that I had received, the pre-Vatican II sort of education. And I have to say that's what I did. In my teaching and all that, I was always sort of suggesting that somehow a return to the order of things that you found in Christendom was the thing to do. That was how I was thinking for a long, long time. And then I was sent to Israel. And like I said in the video, something happened to me last week in Israel, and I went down by the Western Wall. I would go down there every night because it's really close to our house, because it was interesting to see there were people from all over the world flooding into this big plaza, singing and dancing. Soldiers would be taking oaths of loyalty. It was a very impressive sort of a spot. It was like free drama every night. But if that was the Western Wall, in front of it there was a smaller barrier. And that marked off what was technically a synagogue. And out of respect for the Jews, I never went in. And I was there for one night in my last week in Jerusalem before heading back to the U.S. and to get ordained. And I was standing there, and there's this big Hasidic Jew from New York comes up to me. I didn't know him from Adam. And he says, "What's the matter with you?" I thought, oh, it says, "What's the matter with you? You're here every night, you don't go in. Go in." And I thought, first I thought, are they watching me? And the second thought was, well, I guess if a Jew invites you in, you can go in. So I went in. They had these cardboard keepers you can put. Have you been there? They had these cardboard keepers they put on your head. You can put on your head and go in. And so I went in and thought, well, now what am I supposed to do? Everybody goes and leans against the wall. So that's what I'll do. I went up to the wall and I leaned into the wall, and it was like something happened. I still can't talk about it without getting, it was a long time ago. Something happened. I felt this rush of feeling. And when I pulled back from the wall, I was saying to myself, what the heck was that? And later on, trying to articulate what I was feeling, I thought, I feel two things. One, I felt as close to God as the warmth coming out from those stones that had been heated by the sun all day. And I felt as distant from God as if these gigantic stones were between me and God. I felt both closeness and radical distance. I should say actually three things. So the third thing was, I felt like I had a brother that I never knew about, but who knew me for my whole life, and that I had to get to know him. That was the way I articulated it to myself. I later found out that I actually did have a brother that I didn't know, and that who knew about me plenty well. And I met him a few years before his death. My father had an earlier marriage about which I had done nothing. But that wasn't the brother that this feeling is about. It was recognizing that the Jews are our brother in a way that I had never thought about. And related to this is another event that same summer, a little bit earlier. I was, again, down toward the Western Wall, and I was hanging around with this evangelical guy at that time. And we were standing there watching the people praying at the wall, and I said, isn't it amazing how dedicated these people are to their faith? And for all these years and all the suffering they've gone through, and here they are pouring their hearts out before God. I said, this is really amazing. And the evangelical said, yeah, too bad they're all going to hell. And I thought, that can't be. That does not make sense. But later I thought, yeah, but that is sort of what I was been taught, kind of. And I was taught that the Jews were God's people, but they lost it at the crucifixion, and that we become the true Israel, and they're out of the ballgame until the end of the world. And it was around that time that I heard about the Vatican II document, Nostra Aetate, in which the Church begins to shift its position towards the Jews, and begins to allow for the idea to float that the covenant of the Jews is living and valid. When I first heard that, cocky little theologian that I was, I said, you can't do that. You can't change it. This is a subtle teacher. You can't change it. But when that evangelical said they're all going to hell, I thought, it has to change. I thought, well, this is a big change. Our relationship to the people of the Old Covenant defines, to a large extent, who we are. We define ourselves partly by our relationship to those who came earlier. And I said, if we're shifting that, there's something down at the foundations that's kind of shaking. And I'm going to have to rethink my understanding of Christianity. And that's what I was getting at the film. I said something happened to me in Jerusalem just before I'm ordained, and after that I'm put into a state of permanent crisis for the rest of my religious life, which is actually the case. Because I couldn't just accept what I had been taught by rote, And even though what I had been taught was intellectually very coherent in its own way, there was something serious that was missing. This is not what I intended to say, but this was actually saying. I was saying, who was the fellow I was talking to? He lives in Hudson. I told him I had a funny sort of epiphany in Hudson, of all places. Partly because of this my being unsettled in my understanding of things. I had a lot of difficulty in my early years in religious life. Maybe not just the early ones, but I had a lot of trouble. A lot of people had trouble in those days after Vatican II when everything was so confused. I particularly had a lot of trouble. And at one point, thought I have to get out of the community for a while. I went to this little village in the middle of Quebec, 150 miles of dirt road to get to this little village in the middle of nowhere, French-speaking Quebec. The bishop over that area accepted me to take over a parish that he needed a priest in. When it was time for me to return finally to the Assumptionists, by that time I was beginning to digest this new understanding I had of Judaism, the radical importance of our getting to reconnect somehow with the Jews. And I was heading to Worcester, going down 495, and I got onto 290 right there at Hudson, and I was curving around. And just at that point, I was listening to Paul Johnson's A History of the Jews in my Jeep. And I was going around the bend, and suddenly Paul Johnson started talking about the Assumptionists, okay, and their role in the Dreyfus affair in France. Okay, this is not the most glorious moment in the history of the Assumptionists. France, Dreyfus was the first Jewish man who became an officer in the French army. And he was falsely accused of spying for the Germans and stripped of his officership and sentenced to life at Devil's Island or something like that. Awful stuff. But France was divided. There were a lot of French people who said, this guy was innocent, this is a trumped up case. A lot of other people were saying, dirty Jew, get rid of him. And it kept France in a state of turmoil for 10 or 11 years. It was a very dramatic period in French history. And what it did was it exposed the deep levels of anti-Semitism in France until people hadn't quite noticed. And Paul Johnson was saying that the Assumptionist newspaper, La Croix, had been stirring up the rabble. That's the way Paul Johnson put it. He's a very temperate guy. The Assumptionists had been stirring up the anti-Semitic rabble in France. And I thought, what the heck is this? I'm going back to the Assumptionists. So I'm coming back as someone who sees the importance of the Jews, and there's this in our history that I never knew about. And that was right. Every time I go around that curve, I remember that moment. But what I'm saying is, I was becoming aware of really the very deep importance and the troubling history between Christians and Jews. And I thought, this is not something you can just walk by. It's something that we are required to look at. I forget which one of the popes it was. I think it was John the 23rd, who said, you can't look at the Holocaust and not see the face of Christ. And the first time I read that responded to my own experience as a little kid, even, seeing movies about Auschwitz and all this. I used to draw pictures of Auschwitz victims as Christ as a kid. So I resonated with what had been said there, and I saw that this is huge, okay? This is in the middle of what was Christendom that these events took place. Okay, now, the Nazis were effectively pagans and all that, yeah. But this was the land, these were the lands of Christendom. And they had turned into a place that was attempting to annihilate the people of the first covenant. I thought, this is a very big thing. This is a revelatory thing. It's showing us something about the reality of our reality living here in the modern world. How could it be that it was in the lands of Christendom that this enormous project was undertaken that employed the full resources of the technology that was available to deceive, trap, transport, degrade and destroy and send up the chimneys millions of these people. How is that possible? I still can't get it. I've been to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, very impressive place, many times. Always hoping that somehow this time my mind will grasp it. There's a mystery of evil that's at work there.
It's because if you can make, your opponent or the group you don't like seem less than human, then it's very easy to do not great things to them,
Yeah,
that's what the Nazi propaganda did.
The Nazis were very skillful at propaganda and generating this hatred of the Jews. But the point of my story about Dreyfus was that this feeling was all over Europe. And it was an old feeling. It had been around for quite some time. Not in the radical form that it took. You had to get rid of Christianity in the German heart before this thing could emerge. But it came out of what were the lands of Christendom. We can't just say we're innocent of this. This is not relevant to us. This is somebody else at a different time. This is just a little while ago. I've met some Holocaust survivors. Had dinner with one last year when I was in Jerusalem. They were really remarkable people. So there they were. They were at Auschwitz, and some of the other camps. And so I thought that this is a revelatory event. It's unlike. It always felt to me like it was unlike. There are lots of horrors in human history. This one felt different to me. It always has. And to me, it felt like we're living in revelatory times. That this thing should happen in our time. At the same time that Christianity is itself going through a very profound crisis. When I was a senior at Assumption, my teacher, Father Ernest Fortin, really a terrific teacher, agreed to do an independent study with me. And he said, okay, we'll do a course. He was teaching philosophy, political philosophy, theology. He gave me a stack of books. Books by the greatest anti-Christian thinkers in the modern world. He called the course the Anti-Christian Polemic. He had to read all these books. He said, read these and write a paper. So I read this stuff. And they talk about, that's the early stage of my crisis, I guess. And at the head of them all was Nietzsche. The first time I read Nietzsche, I hated him. My book was no, for hundreds of pages, disagreeing with everything he said. And then I read it again, and I started saying, the third time I read it, I started memorizing everything. I thought he was just terrific. I read him again, and I began to see him in a more moderate light. But Nietzsche is a serious thinker. And when he says God is dead, what he means is that the Western world that had organized itself as Christendom and practiced Christianity as its cultural religion, that world was losing its faith, and that God was not going to be effective for this civilization anymore, and that meant the civilization was going to collapse or form itself in a whole new way. And you talked about the Superman as the one who's going to sort of bring the Western world to a new stage of development. But it turns out that part is bunk. There is no Superman. You don't create a civilization by inventing it on the spot. But Nietzsche was right in saying the order of things as we were used to it for a long time is done. So you see this event of the Holocaust and this tottering of Christianity. And then you see Israel popping into existence after 2,000 years. They have no state. But at the same time that these things are happening, the Jews get it into their head that it is time to go back. It's a mysterious thing. It's a crazy thing in a way. You read the story of Theodor Herzl, the guy who started the Zionist movement in a big way. Kind of a crazy guy. But he wrote in his journal 50 years before 1948, when the state came to be. He wrote in his journal, 5 years from now, well, maybe 50, we will have a state. When you go to the Holocaust Memorial, did you go there? Oh, okay. It's a strange building. It's like two giant slabs of concrete, long slabs that stand up against each other. And you have to walk the length of this long building, this zigzag path. It takes a long time. Each zig or zag takes you to a different moment in the story of the Holocaust. It's an exhausting experience and deeply disturbing. But when you get to the end of it, the slab building is built on a hilltop. And it's so long, it shoots out over the edge of the hill. So the end of the building is suspended in the air. And it's on the outskirts of Jerusalem, where a town called Ein Kerem, John the Baptist's old town, this beautiful wooded valley. So you get to the end of this building, and you're standing there, and you're looking out. And you're looking out at the land of Israel for which these people longed for so many years. And that too gives you this sense that something is happening in the world. There's a shift that's taking place. And not just some ordinary historical shift, but the kind of shift that you see taking place in the Bible. You know, when God tells Moses, get them out of there, get them out of Egypt. When God calls Abraham, leader. 75 years old, he's got no kids. All he has is the larger extended family back in the Babylonian territory. God says, leave everything. At 75 years old, you're going to march away from your healthcare support and all this stuff. Yeah, but that's how this story goes. It does. It goes. And everything after changes. Okay, this is an event that nobody could see. You know, if some homeless person goes walking by here tonight, that's how Abraham would look to you. But what's happening is the history of the world is flexing, and something radically new is going to take place. So I think we're living in a kind of flex point, and it's by no means business as usual. And that the scriptures, strange and foreign as they can seem to us, are telling a story that resonates with kind of awesome truth about what's really happening in the world, about what really happens in the world. It's not just what happened a long time ago. The Bible tells the story of what happens.
Could you elaborate why we're at like a flex point?
I'm sorry.
Could you elaborate why we're at like a flex point or like an inflection point?
Well, it's because of these things. Christianity has been wobbling and losing its influence. That the Jews have returned. That Christendom, in the midst of Christendom, this greatest of horrors took place. That the Jews, after having been expelled from the land of Israel 2,000 years ago, and after having prayed for a return with their synagogue services every day, for a return to the land, they returned. And they did it. They succeeded. How do you do this? How do you go back? What are your ethnic origins?
Portuguese and Italian.
So you're going back to Portugal? It's a possibility, but it's like a lifelong dream. And do all the exiled Portuguese want to go back and rebuild old Portugal? It's not. It doesn't make any sense at all. But the Jews wanted to go back, rebuild, start over. They were coming from all over the world, speaking the languages of the whole world. They get together there and they say, what language are we going to speak? German Jew said Yiddish, Russian Jew said Russian. One Russian Jew, Eliezer ben Yehuda, a linguist, said, we're going to speak Hebrew. They knew Hebrew is a liturgical text. He said, we're going to turn it to a modern language. We're going to be able to take a bus in Jerusalem in Hebrew. And they did. He established these schools. Everybody went to school, and they taught themselves Hebrew, and it's now a vibrant, exceedingly vibrant language. When Eliezer ben Yehuda died, 30,000 people went to his funeral out of gratitude for restoring the language of Hebrew as a spoken language. I like languages, and when I read that story, I wept. It's so beautiful. So that makes me say, something's happening. I don't know what. I don't know where it's going. When Moses is on Mount Sinai, at one point he says to God, let me see your glory. God says, you can't see my glory. I'll show you my back. Okay? And he puts Moses in a cleft in the rock and then covers the cleft so Moses can't see anything. And then approaches and then walks away. And when he walks away, he lets Moses see his back. What is this saying? This is saying you can't guess what God's going to do next. What you can do is look at what He's done and say, this is what history means. Okay? It's God's action among us. So I don't know what this flexion point leads to. All I think is that it demands of us that we are paying attention and looking with biblical eyes, looking from the standpoint of the story of history as the Bible presents it to us. Looking at history from the standpoint that is other than the standpoint of the secular nations. This is a way of beginning to experience in your own inner life what it means to be part of the kingdom of God. Okay? It is not identifiable with any of the kingdoms of man, even Israel. Yeah, so I think this is paying attention to the Jews is a way of becoming alert to the action of God in history. And I also think it's a way to sort of rediscover the radical nature of Christianity. God calls the Jews into covenant and therefore sets them into a difficult relationship with everybody else in the world. And Jesus says, want to follow me? You take up the cross. Okay, what's the cross? The instrument of national punishment directed against those who are not loyal to the gods of the nation. I love the United States, but it's not to be God to me. No political thing, now or in the past or in the future, is the all-determining reality. They all pass away. That's another thing you see from the point of, if you're looking at history from the point of view of the Jews. Israeli kids wear these sweatshirts, the box, those commandments. You can pick it up and travel with it. Okay? No boundaries, no fixed point. It's like the Ark of Noah. passing across the sea of history. And the waves are these nations that come and go, but they're still here. Jesus calls us to be part of his kingdom that lasts forever. It's an extension of the kingdom that God began to build with Abraham. To see history in that way, sort of from this super historical viewpoint, is sobering. And it's also encouraging. Sometimes I'll be reading the news, I'll be looking at what's happening in America, and I'll get all the stress and say, oh, God, in heaven, we're going to hell, and this is just such a mess. We're done for. Everybody's done for. All the nations are done for. That isn't where you put your eggs. You put your feet in this very peculiar kingdom of God here in the world that can sometimes be desperately poor and not looking very royal. Jesus doesn't look particularly royal on the cross. But it's the real thing. I've been talking too long, but I just want to, since I brought this thing with me. What's this? Walrus. Vic. It's carved by a Newman guy up in a little town called Iglulik, about 150 miles north of the Arctic Circle, where I worked for 3.5 years. The other dimension of this experience of mine was going to a place where there were no Jews at all. The Arctic. There wasn't a one I could find. When I was in Greenland for 2 summers, and I said, well, there was a guy who ran a business here once. That was it. And then the Canadian Arctic, not one. But what there is there is the people who had no contact with Western civilization until just 100 years ago. And who have come into contact with this civilization, and it's killing them. It's destroyed their way of life. I get wicked angry when I think about it. And it makes me see in this very concrete way the sort of toxic nature of the kingdoms of men. They go up there with all this kind of innocent arrogance and say, oh, look, you're not living the right way, okay? You're out there on the ice all the time chasing polar bears and walruses and whatever. You're going to move you together into nice big villages, and you get your houses, electricity, schools, TV, cell phones, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, bingo. We're going to improve your life. The suicide rate is astronomical. When I look at them, I say, Jesus talks about salvation. These people need to be saved. And what could save them is hearing and believing the call that comes to them to be part of, not of Canada, but of the kingdom of God. If they could see that and feel it, they could stand up to the Canadian government and say, take your welfare, and go home and leave us be. But right now they can't. They're just utterly overwhelmed by our greatness. I remember seeing a bunch of them they were with me on an airplane coming back down to Ottawa. And a bunch of us lost our baggage, and so I had to go to the baggage window and make my complaint. And there were a bunch of Inuit guys there. They were so afraid to talk to the agent, so intimidated by us. Kadluna, we call us. It's the word for white people. You don't want to be one of those. I was walking down the street one day, and this 4-year-old kid was standing on his bike. They looked up and they saw me, and he went, "Oh, Kadluna, Kadluna."
We're the bad guys.
They're so intimidated by us. I think that the gospel could give them the sense of dignity they need to stand up to the fraudulence of Western ways. And I think precisely the same thing is necessary for us and our families and our kids. All right, I'm done. Any questions, comments? Questions, comments?
How do you propose bringing kind of the kingdom of God to people who aren't part of it or don't see it? How do you propose bringing the kingdom of God into that kind of world?
That's a very hard question.
Yeah.
I was there for, like I said, 3.5 years, which is nothing. What I did do is I started a Bible reading group. So they like to tell stories. Tell them the story that the scriptures tell. Show this little, completely insignificant people, beginning with Abraham, about the same time that the Inuit people came over from Asia into North America 4,000 years ago. And you look at how they made it, how they knew how to raise their kids in every sort of circumstance. They didn't lose them just because they were in a different place. They're losing their kids. But it's hard. They're profoundly ignorant. I don't say that as a pejorative thing, but the fact is they just don't know anything. They only received the written language 100 years ago from the missionaries. They have very dim recollections of their own past. They lived in small family groups that were nomadic, so they lived mostly separate from each other. The land doesn't support large groups unless you bring in technology. So to take them from there to, I think what you need is somebody who's going to live with them for a long time and rehearse this story to them and to act toward them like they are indeed members of the chosen people of God. Maybe with time that would get through. And I shouldn't say maybe. There are some people who have been evangelized up there, and in all their simplicity, they are real Christians. They kind of radiate a beautiful dignity in the midst of the sometimes horrible things that happen to them up there. But the same question applies now to us. You know, how do you get through to? In my generation, all our families are divided. Okay, there are people who still somehow have a grip on the faith, and people who think that that's lunacy. You try to talk to the people who think it's lunacy, you don't get very far. And I don't know how at all you overcome that difficulty. I mean, there's the Mosaic method. Okay, you take them out of Egypt, you spend 40 years waiting for the old ones to die, and then you can start fresh. But aside from, I don't know. And you don't have to know, okay? Kingdom of heaven is like leaven. These little invisible things that you try to do. Think of the things that save you, in your life. There are moments in your life when you really need somebody to do something for you, and somebody does. And like that guy who said, "What's the matter with you? You're here every night." It changed my life. I wish I knew who he was so I could thank him. And there are other people that I could look at over the course of my life where I could say that what that person did at that moment saved me. So somehow to try and be available for that. But on the big scale, this is God's business.
Going back earlier, how do we ought to view our relationship with the Jewish people and the relationship with Christ today?
You know, people will say, look, the Jews don't recognize Jesus. Okay, this is a big problem. My response to that is this. How are the Jews going to recognize Jesus if we're the ones who represent the body of Christ in the world? Okay, how have we treated the Jews for these past millennia? We have to change. Okay, they're deeply suspicious of us, and I don't blame them at all. But you can get through. I've seen it a number of times. Another short story. I was living on an Indian reservation in down East Maine, a place called Indian Township, Maine. It's on the border with New Brunswick, near Calais, Maine. How I got there and why I was there, we didn't decide. But it was there that I said, okay, I want to learn Hebrew. And I tried to learn Hebrew. But Hebrew is hard to learn by yourself because it doesn't use vowels. So it's hard just to stay in front of us. I gotta find somebody who knows Hebrew. And down East Maine is not the Brooklyn. It's not Jewish territory. And so I was asking all the Indians on the reservation, do you know any Jews? Finally, one guy said, Mr. Silverman in Calais, he used to be a state senator. He's a Jew. So I called up the Silverman household, and his whole family said, I said, well, I'm this Catholic priest. Looked down the road, got in my head, I want to learn Hebrew. I was hoping your husband could teach me Hebrew. And she says, I am Israeli. She was born in Jerusalem. She studied philosophy and theology at the Hebrew University. She's raising her children to be Israelis living there in Maine. I said, will you teach me? She said, call back in 2 weeks, we'll see. She wanted, I didn't find this out until years later, she wanted to go see her rabbi down in Bangor to see if it's okay to teach this priest Hebrew because she was afraid that I would be out proselytizing Jews who are immigrating to Israel. Russian Jews especially, his religion was pretty weak. Anyway, she did agree. And first thing I did when I got to their house, she was standing there, I shook her hand, her husband said, I'm supposed to touch her. My first move was a mistake. Yeah, she's a real Orthodox Jew, and I had very dark conceptions of Christianity. But she saw that I was seriously interested in what she knew, and that I respected it. Okay, and we made it our rule that when we talked, she's supposed to be teaching me Hebrew. We ended up talking about Judaism and Christianity. The rule was you say what you really think. Don't worry about being nice. Okay, but sometimes it stung quite a bit, I have to say. Okay. But over the course of that time, she came to see that maybe there's a Christianity isn't quite so bad. We're still best friends. Had some other experiences in Israel too, right, where I met Jews, and that was my attitude. You know, I think you guys possess the truth too, and I want to hear what you have to say. And I've had some really kind of thrilling conversations where they were willing to listen to what I had to say and pay attention to it, you know, to say, you know, maybe there's something here. So if we treat them that way, it's up to us first. It's not up to them first. It's up to us first to say, we see you as our brother. Blood brothers. and we belong together. I can't force you to see that, but I want you to know that's what I see. I'm your brother. Like it or not. And I guess that's also how we should treat our own people who are lost. You're my brother, you just don't know it. Which is very hard. That's not just want to say, you're not my brother, you're a jerk. Okay, go away. But that's what we're called to do.
Question here. What was the exact change in salvation theology from pre to post Vatican II?
Well, there.
That you said like you struggled with that first.
Yeah. I don't want to get too theoretical, but when you were expected to study theology to be a priest, okay, you were brought basically into the theology of Thomas Aquinas, which is based on the philosophy of Aristotle. And that provided sort of the intellectual bones of what I was studying as a Christian trying to become a priest. And I think that the vision of Aristotle is entirely incompatible with the vision of the Bible. That's what I've come to see. And that I have to sort of let go of the stuff that I love very much, and see my faith based not on some sort of abstract system of very interesting ideas, but that it's based on a relationship to a particular being, if I could put it that way. For Greek philosophy, you don't count. You are a passing instance of the species man. That lasts forever. You turn to crap in no time. The Bible takes it the other way around. It says what's real is this guy, and this woman, and this woman. Okay? This is where reality is. Concrete reality. And it's that way because the creator of all things is like that himself. I will be who I will be. This is not Aristotle's being. This is somebody. The story in the Bible that encapsulates this most succinctly is the story of Moses at the burning bush. Moses is this educated Egyptian. I mean, he's Hebrew, but he's raised in Pharaoh's household, so he goes to Harvard, he studies political science. Okay, he's a smart guy. And then he has to run away, he's out driving a cab in Somerville. Look, he's a shepherd, low man on the totem pole, walking around the desert, bored to death, and then he sees this bush burning. He says, "Oh my gosh, what the heck is this?" And an average shepherd would say, "It's a desert genie," and run away. Moses says, "I have to turn aside to see this sight. Why? The bush doesn't burn up." And he approaches this with this objective, scientific, sort of Aristotelian viewpoint. He's going to figure it out, looking at it. And it says, "Moses, take off your shoes." You know these CSI TV programs? Yeah. You get this corpse on the slab, and you're poking away. So the bullet came at this angle from this distance. And you're poking at the body, and suddenly the body says, "Cut it out." Do you say, "Shut up, I'm conducting an investigation"? The whole intellectual construct shifts. You're in the presence of a person, that's what matters. Everything else is highly secondary. And I think that the way I was taught theology, I don't know how it was with you, but the way I was taught theology, it was this big abstract thing, which I loved, it was beautiful. But it's not this presence that says, "Will you take off your shoes, please? I have something for you to do, Jesus refers to that argument when he makes an argument for eternal life. The Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection. Jesus says, you guys don't understand anything. Think of Moses at the burning bush. Moses asks him, what's your name? He says, I will be who I will be. And then he says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, your fathers. This is my name forever. Okay? This is not an abstract being. He's saying, I'm this guy. And I'm related to you. And I expect you to do something for me, please. Go to Egypt. Spend the rest of your life taking care of these stiff-necked Hebrews. Moses says, I don't want to go. God says, go. Okay? This is not philosophy. So I began to interiorize that shift. Okay? And I see that it's not this abstract universal idea. It begins with this people, this weird people, these crazy Jews. When I was a kid, I didn't know anything about the Jews at all. I was walking home one Friday evening with a buddy of mine. We were walking past the town synagogue, and the rabbi came out and says, boys, can you help me? I said, okay. He said, I want you to turn out the lights. So I figured, all right, so way up there, we have to go up a ladder or something. Go in there, and he points to the light switch. I said, you want me to flick the switch? He said, I thought, what the hell is this so crazy? This is Sabbath law. Okay? No sort of work. You don't start a fire. The switch ignites a kind of electrical fire. You can't do it. Okay? Weird. The Jews are weird in lots of ways. They're singular. And God is singular. So I began to pay attention to that. And that shifts your whole way of looking at things. Okay? That's enough? Too much? Okay, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.